Jack stood on the edge of the ruined field, watching smoke rise from broken machines and shattered walls. The world had been fighting for years, and men like him were told there were rules to follow. There were books that spoke of honor, and codes that guided the way soldiers fought. But as Jack looked around, he saw nothing honorable in the destruction. He saw hunger in the eyes of children, fear in the faces of women, and rage building in men who had lost too much. Rules had not saved them. Rules had only kept them weak. Ethan joined him, carrying a rifle that had been repaired many times. His hands were scarred, his face hard, but his eyes still carried fire. He told Jack that the old ways no longer worked. Their enemies did not care about honor. They cared about victory. And if humanity kept fighting by old rules, they would be crushed. Jack agreed, and the two men made a choice that would change everything. They would fight to win, not to follow rules written by leaders who sat far from the battlefield. In the nearby village, Claire moved among the wounded. She was no stranger to loss. She had buried her brothers in shallow graves after a raid. She had carried her mother on her back when fire consumed their home. Yet she did not break. She learned to move fast, to strike first, and to never give mercy to those who showed none. She began training others in the village. Boys who had never held a weapon now learned to move in the night. Girls who once sang by fires now carried knives and learned how to defend their families. Claire told them that survival was not in following rules, but in breaking free of them. Megan was younger, but she was clever. While others fought with steel and fire, she fought with words and plans. She spread messages from town to town, warning people not to wait for orders from leaders who only cared about power. She told them to fight their own way. She told them to make every path a trap, every river a weapon, and every home a fortress. Her voice carried farther than weapons could reach, and soon villages began to rise. Walls were built without permission. Raids were planned without waiting for generals. People acted, and with action came strength. Jack, Ethan, Claire, and Megan began to shape a new way of war. They stopped asking permission. They stopped waiting for orders, struck where they wanted, when they wanted, and how they wanted. The rulers who had once believed humanity could be contained grew angry. They called Jack a traitor. They called Ethan a criminal. They called Claire dangerous. They called Megan a liar. But none of it stopped them. The people followed them because the people saw results. For the first time, villages fought back and won. Daniel was one of those who joined them after losing everything. He had watched his farm burn, his family taken, his neighbors silenced. When he met Jack, he did not speak of honor, spoke of revenge. Daniel fought with fury, and his fury spread. Others followed him, and soon small groups turned into armies. These were not armies bound by rules. These were men and women bound by survival. They moved fast, struck hard, and vanished before their enemies could react. As the fires of rebellion spread, the old leaders grew desperate. They built prisons, they sent enforcers, they tried to scare the people back into silence. But the people were no longer afraid. Jack and Ethan led raids that broke chains. Claire freed villages that had been locked down. Megan's words kept spirits alive. Daniel's fury turned into strength for others. What began as small sparks became a storm. And for the first time in history, the rules of war began to break, not by chance, but by choice. The rulers believed they could still bring the people back under control. They sent armies with banners and drums, marching in rows as they had for generations. They believed discipline and tradition would crush the fire spreading through the land. But the people had changed, and the rules no longer mattered. Jack watched the marching lines from a hill and told Ethan that such order was weakness. He saw targets where the rulers saw strength, told his men to move at night, strike when least expected, and vanish before the enemy could fight back. Ethan crafted traps from broken wood and steel scraps. He turned simple fields into killing grounds. When the ruler's army marched through, they fell into pits and were struck from the shadows. Men trained to fight in rows could not face enemies who came from every side. When dawn broke, the rulers found their armies shattered, and the villagers who once feared them stood tall with weapons in hand. Ethan told the survivors that fear no longer had power. Victory belonged to those who refused to be contained. Claire led a band of women into towns that had been locked under guard. She struck with speed, cutting chains and opening gates. She armed the weak and guided them to fight back. Once, women had been told to stay in silence while men fought, but Claire broke that chain too. She told them their strength mattered. They fought in streets, on rooftops, and through alleys. They turned the guards' own weapons against them. Claire became a shadow in the city, a name whispered with hope. When people spoke of freedom, they spoke of her. Megan's words spread faster than the rulers could silence them. She sent messages hidden in baskets, carved on stones, and sung in simple songs. Children carried her words across villages, and the rulers could not stop them. She told the people that the war was no longer about armies, but about survival. She told them that anyone could fight and anyone could win. Her voice became a weapon sharper than steel, for it reached places no soldier could touch. When rulers banned her name, it only spread faster. Daniel fought with rage that grew each day. He no longer cared for rules or mercy. When the rulers burned another village, Daniel struck back without warning. He led raids in storms, in darkness, and across rivers. He carried no banner, and he gave no warning. His enemies called him ruthless, but the people called him justice. For every farm destroyed, he burned a stronghold. For every chain placed, he broke 10 more. His fury gave courage to others who had once believed they were too weak to fight. The queen rose in these days of fire. Her name was Elizabeth, and she had long been known as wise and fair. The rulers expected her to stand with them, to calm the restless, and to bring order. But Elizabeth saw the truth. She saw that the people no longer trusted the old ways. She saw that rules had chained them, and that those chains had to be broken. She chose not to speak for the rulers, but for the people. She stood beside Jack, Ethan, Claire, Megan, and Daniel. With her voice, she gave the rebellion a crown, not of gold, but of unity. The rulers trembled when they learned she had turned against them. They called her a traitor, but the people called her their queen. Under her guidance, the rebellion grew stronger. Villages once afraid now stood tall. Men and women alike carried weapons. Children learned to defend instead of hide. For the first time in history, the rulers faced not armies bound by order, but a people who fought in ways that could not be predicted. Rules no longer defined war. Humanity itself had begun to rewrite it. The fire of rebellion spread far beyond what the rulers had expected. Towns once loyal to them now turned against them. Villages that had lived in fear now rose with courage. The Queen Elizabeth stood among her people, not as a distant ruler, but as one who shared their struggle. She walked through camps, spoke to the fighters, and reminded them that freedom was worth more than life itself. The people listened because she did not demand, she inspired. Her voice gave strength to the weak and calm to the furious. Her presence was enough to turn fear into defiance. Jack became the spear of the rebellion. He moved with his men through forests and hills, striking at supply lines and cutting the lifeblood of the enemy. He no longer cared for drawn battles, chose speed and surprise. With Ethan by his side, they built traps that destroyed whole regiments before they even saw the enemy. Jack told his men that victory did not come from numbers, but from will. He showed them that a small group with courage could defeat a larger force bound by rules. Ethan was more than a soldier, became the mind behind new ways of war. He turned rivers into barriers and bridges into weapons. He made roads vanish under fire and smoke. No army could move without finding him waiting. He laughed at the idea of honor on the battlefield, for he had seen too much blood to care for honor. To him, only survival mattered. And survival meant breaking every tradition the rulers had forced upon them. Claire carried the rebellion into the hearts of the people. She did not only fight in battles, but also taught others to fight for themselves. She trained women and children to defend their homes. She made safe paths for those who fled and guided them into new lands. She turned cities into fortresses where every wall had eyes and every street had traps. She fought not for herself but for the family she refused to see destroyed. When people saw her, they saw the hope that even the weakest could stand strong. Megan grew more dangerous to the rulers than any blade. Her words traveled through the land, passed by whisper and by song. She made the rebellion more than a war. She made it an idea, and ideas could not be killed. Soldiers who once marched for the rulers now questioned why they fought. Some deserted, others joined the people. Megan told them that the rulers wanted to chain them forever, and many listened. Her words weakened armies before a battle even began. Daniel burned with endless rage, struck where the rulers felt safe. He set their strongholds aflame. He tore down their banners. He destroyed their symbols of power. His fury gave the people a lesson. He showed them that even the greatest fortress could fall when faced with a man who refused to bow. His enemies called him ruthless, but to the people he was proof that no enemy was beyond reach. His fury was not blind. It was guided by the pain he carried, and that pain made him relentless. The queen saw all these sparks turning into a great fire. She did not try to control them. Instead, she guided them, reminding them that every act of defiance was a step toward freedom. She told the people that they were no longer soldiers under rulers, but a nation of free men and women who would never again be contained. Under her vision, the rebellion was no longer scattered strikes. It became a force that shook the world. For the first time, the rulers realized they were not facing a revolt. Were facing a new kind of war that no rule could govern. The rulers grew desperate as their power slipped away. They had thought discipline and tradition would win the war. But discipline could not fight shadows, and tradition could not stop fire. Every day their armies marched in rows, and every night Jack and Ethan struck from the darkness. They burned supply lines, cut bridges, and vanished before the soldiers could fight back. The rulers punished villages for helping the rebels, but for every punishment, 10 more villages rose in anger. The fear that once held people silent was gone, replaced by defiance. Jack became a name that carried across the land. Some called him a hero, others called him a traitor, but no one denied his victories. He fought with a will that could not be broken. Ethan stood beside him, always ready with new tricks that left their enemies helpless. Once, Ethan turned an entire valley into a trap, flooding it and washing away hundreds of soldiers. When word spread, people laughed at the rulers, for their armies were strong only in stories, not in battle. Claire carried her fight into the heart of cities. She moved with speed, striking in places where the rulers thought themselves safe. She freed prisoners, armed the poor, and struck fear into guards who once believed themselves untouchable. She taught the people that no chain was unbreakable. With her guidance, ordinary men and women turned streets into battlegrounds. She told them to never wait for orders, to fight in their own way, and to never give mercy to those who had shown none. Her name became a warning to the rulers, for wherever she walked, rebellion followed. Megan's voice became the strongest weapon of the rebellion. She spoke through hidden letters, carved marks, and coded songs. Her words spread faster than soldiers could march. She told the people that freedom was within reach, that the rulers were weaker than they pretended. She told them that every house could be a fortress and every road a weapon. Even soldiers serving the rulers began to doubt, for Megan's words reached them too. Some laid down their weapons, others slipped away in the night to join the rebellion. The rulers tried to silence her, but silencing one voice only made 10 more rise. Daniel grew into a storm. His fury had no rest, and his enemies feared his name. He struck with fire and steel, leaving nothing for the rulers to reclaim. He destroyed their food stores, broke their war machines, and burned their banners. When the people saw his flames, they did not feel fear, they felt hope. He was the proof that the rulers were not untouchable. Daniel showed that rage could be a weapon, and that even pain could be turned into strength. His fury spread like wildfire, and others followed his path. Queen Elizabeth stood above them all, not distant, but close to the people. She walked through villages, ate with soldiers, and spoke to the wounded. She reminded them that this was not only a fight to win battles, but a fight to build a future where no ruler could chain them again. She guided Jack, Ethan, Claire, Megan, and Daniel, not by giving orders, but by giving vision. Under her presence, the rebellion became united. Men and women from far lands joined, for they believed in her cause. She gave them more than courage. She gave them purpose. The rulers saw the storm rising and knew they were losing control. Their armies were breaking, their cities falling, their power crumbling. Yet they still believed they could contain humanity with harsher laws and greater force. But the people no longer listened. The people no longer feared. The old rules of war had burned away, and in their place stood something new, something unstoppable. Humanity had broken every chain, and with Queen Elizabeth guiding them, they were ready to bring the final blow. The final battles came when the rulers gathered their last strength. They pulled soldiers from every corner, armed them with the best weapons, and built walls higher than ever before. They believed that if they crushed the rebellion in one strike, they could rebuild their rule. But the people no longer feared their walls or their weapons. Jack looked at the fortress before them and told his fighters that stone and steel could not stand against will. Ethan had already found the weakness, and together they planned to bring the walls down. Under cover of night, Ethan placed charges in hidden places. He used rivers to weaken the ground beneath the walls. Jack led small groups to strike from different sides, drawing the enemy out. When the sun rose, the rulers thought they had the rebels surrounded, but instead they found themselves trapped. The walls cracked, towers fell, and the fortress that had been called unbreakable was torn apart by the very people it was meant to contain.
Ow.
Claire led her band into the heart of the city beyond the fortress. She freed prisoners who had been waiting for years in chains. She gave them weapons and guided them into the fight, the streets filled with voices shouting for freedom. Guards laid down their arms or were struck down in the chaos. Claire showed the people that cities were not cages, but could become places of strength. Where once there had been silence, now there was only defiance. Megan's words carried across the land even during the final battle. She had sent her messages days before, telling every village and town to rise at the same time. When the fortress fell, news spread like fire. People in distant places struck against the rulers. They cut supply lines, destroyed bridges, and drove soldiers from their homes. The rulers could not fight in one place without losing another. Megan's words had turned the rebellion into a storm that covered the whole land. Ow. Daniel fought with his fury, burning brighter than ever. He charged through the enemy lines with men who had lost everything like him. They did not stop to rest. They did not stop to fear. They tore through the strongest soldiers the rulers had, leaving nothing standing in their path. Daniel burned their banners in the center of the city, and his fire was seen by thousands. His rage became the signal that the end had come.
Ow.
Queen Elizabeth entered the city when the fighting began to calm. She did not come with guards or a crown, but with the people at her side. She walked into the halls where the rulers had once commanded and declared that their time was over. No throne remained for them, no chains remained for the people. She told the men and women who had fought that they were now free, not because she had given it to them, but because they had taken it for themselves. Her words were carried in every corner, and the people believed her. When the war ended, the rulers were gone, their power broken. The people stood on the ruins of the old order, tired but unchained. Jack and Ethan began to rebuild defenses, not as prisons, but as shields for the free. Blair guided the people in turning cities into homes again. Megan continued to speak, making sure that the truth of their struggle would never be forgotten. Daniel, though scarred, taught others to fight with courage and to never bow again. And Queen Elizabeth became the heart of the new world, not as a ruler above them, but as a leader among them. Oh. The legend of their fight spread through every land. It was said that humans had broken every rule of war, and in doing so, had broken the chains that held them for generations. They had shown that no prison could hold them, no law could bind them, and no ruler could contain them. Humanity had proven that once they chose freedom, nothing could stop them. And with their queen guiding them, they would never be contained again.